Welcome to the Florida Gardener Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer, and today is all about challenging the notion that you need some type of irrigation system in order to have a successful garden. I want to start this episode by sharing an excerpt from Steve Solomon's book called Gardening Without Irrigation, which is a guide to growing food with little or no irrigation. This specific book, which we'll reference a few times throughout the episode, was published in 1992. And for those that don't know, Steve Solomon is a legendary American gardener. He's written tons of books and founded Territorial Seeds, the Oregon-based seed company. He's been growing most of his family's food for over 35 years. What a guy. He now lives in Australia while continuing to grow food for his family. And so he begins. As recently as the 1930s, most American country folk still did not have running water. With water being hand-pumped and carried in buckets, and precious, their vegetable gardens had to be grown with a minimum of irrigation. In the otherwise well-watered East, one could routinely expect several consecutive weeks every summer without rain. In some drought years, a hot, rainless month or longer could go by. So vegetable varieties were bred to grow through dry spells without loss, and traditional American vegetable gardens were designed to help them do so. End quote. There's a lot to unpack just there, but I want to keep going. He goes on to say, finding varieties still adapted to water-wise gardening is becoming difficult. Most American vegetables are now bred for irrigation-dependent California. And like raised bed gardeners, vegetable farmers have discovered that they can make a bigger profit by growing smaller, quick-maturing plants in high-density spacings. Most modern vegetables have been bred to suit this method. Many new varieties can't forage and have become smaller, more determinate, and faster to mature. Actually, the larger, more sprawling heirloom varieties of the past were not a great deal less productive overall, but only a little later to begin yielding. End quote. He goes on to say, fortunately, enough of the old sort still exist that a selective and varietal-aware home gardener can make do. Since I've become water wiser, I'm interested in finding and conserving heirlooms that once supported larger numbers of healthy Americans in relative self-sufficiency. End quote. For anyone interested in reading more of Steve's book, he's made it available for free online at soilandhealth.org, which is a website that he created that provides free downloadable ebooks on agriculture and gardening. That is soilandhealth.org. I had the irrigation in all my landscape beds turned off years ago. I've also worked several jobs that have no irrigation. I'm not saying I'm an expert on this, but what I can tell you is for whatever reason, I really enjoy the challenge of creating a beautiful landscape that has to rely solely on Mother Nature for water. And no, you're not limited to succulents. I was actually outside in my own garden the other day, and the handyman in our community walked over to me. He's a gardener himself. He was complimenting me on my garden and how well the plants are doing. He also said that he was surprised at how quickly everything has filled in. I responded by saying thank you, and told him that, believe it or not, none of it's irrigated. He replied back by offering to fix the irrigation along my townhome. I told him I appreciate the offer, but no thank you. I intentionally have it off. He responded by saying, and I quote, "But irrigation is good for plants. Let me know if you change your mind." Okay, so this is a guy that quite literally just complimented me on how well the garden looked without irrigation, but then as soon as he realized it wasn't irrigated, essentially says I need it because irrigation is good. I bring this up because I think this is the mindset many of us fall into. We assume we need it without even thinking about it. Turn it on, let it run. Lord forbid it break, which, trust me, it will. Irrigation techs stay busy tearing up all our sod, digging up the earth to replace these cheap PVC pipes. This is not an attack on irrigation, by the way. Irrigation serves a purpose. This episode is deeper than that. It's about us and our low tolerance for imperfections in the natural world. How do wildflowers manage to bloom on roadsides? How does an oak canopy spread out 100 feet in the undisturbed depths of the quiet woods? How did Florida's Native American tribes successfully grow and harvest seminole pumpkins for hundreds of years? How on earth do plants survive without us and the modern-day sprinkler and drip systems? I want to make it very clear that this episode is for folks who live in Florida. The information I'm sharing today will not apply to someone who lives in the Nevada desert. Okay, so what are the cons to growing without irrigation, aka dry gardening? Your plants are not going to grow as quickly. And depending on exactly what you're growing, they may be a bit slower to flower, or maybe they will produce a smaller yield. We have an obsession with plants appearing perfect all the time. The vegetables and fruit in the grocery store are bred to attract us. Bigger, brighter, no imperfections. And the same goes with ornamental gardening. We need it greener, lusher, more blooms, more blooms. No, I need more blooms. Why isn't it blooming? Tear it out. I didn't realize how disconnected we were from what a plant naturally looks like in the wild until starting roots. No fault of their own, but many of the folks I meet with do not understand that live plants are not pieces of art or furniture. They are living organisms, and like us, they are in a constant state of change. We turn our nose down to artificial plants, but meanwhile, we want our live plants to look just like them. Oh, the irony. We have no tolerance for a plant being a plant. We also don't have a ton of patience. We don't want to make the effort to source and start an heirloom or true Florida native from seed because it's easier to grab the potted hybridized version at the garden center and just replace it in a few months when it starts to fail. Despite the fact that native and heirloom seeds will provide you flowers and food for the rest of your life. Buy one seed packet and you're set. The Everglades tomato and tropical sage will happily reseed in your garden without human intervention and provide you with food and flowers for the rest of your life. Compare that to the tomato plant or salvia that you find at many garden centers. That is either sterile, aka the seeds from that plant will not germinate and produce more plants, or the plants can't handle our weather and die after the season is over. That way, we'll go back and buy more. It's a business. I certainly can't blame them. It's smart. Also, I gotta be honest, some of the big gorgeous blooms and edibles you see at the big box garden centers, yeah, you're just not gonna get that with a Florida native plant, especially if you're not irrigating. The plants at the garden center are on steroids. They've been juicing. But I would also gently ask you, what are you realistically trying to accomplish here? I've heard many stories of people having a bumper crop of cucumbers or sweet potatoes, or the cut flower garden gets out of hand, whatever it might be, and they don't know what to do with it all. They feel overwhelmed. And if you don't harvest at the right time, the cucumbers will rot, and the flowers you grew to enjoy inside your home will never make it to your vase. My boyfriend and I both romanticize our hobbies. He wants to provide all of our animal protein through hunting and fishing, and I want to provide all our vegetables through gardening. But I'll be honest, neither of us are anywhere near that goal because we have full-time jobs and we live in a townhome. But I also think the spirit of what him and I are trying to accomplish is more important than driving ourselves insane trying to accomplish it. We catch a few fish on the weekend, awesome. My Everglades tomato provides a light snack, great. For us, it's about the process, not the yield. And consequently, yeah, we shop at the grocery store just like most of suburbia. But that doesn't change my belief that you gain a greater appreciation for nature when you grow or catch something yourself. That lesson is so valuable. I should clarify that this episode has nothing to do with the commercial production of food crops. What it takes to feed the world is a lot different than gardening in your backyard as a hobby. So I just want to make that very clear. Although dry farming is a thing, we're not going to talk any more about that today. Definitely look it up if you're interested. An irrigation-free yard does not mean you are limited to succulents. An irrigation-free yard does not mean you bid farewell to a neat and tidy landscape. An irrigation-free yard does not mean your children and pets have no green space to play. An irrigation-free yard can be just as simple, complex, formal, or informal as any other yard or landscape. Remember, there are no bad plants, just bad landscapes. Melanie is a Canadian garden designer I follow on social. Her Instagram page is Lady Landscape. Her work is truly stunning, and she incorporates quote-unquote weeds into some of her designs. I specifically saw a post where she added fleabane, which is a roadside flower which most folks would spray and kill when it starts to show its darling little blooms in the sidewalk crevices. She not only embraces them, but incorporates them into her landscape plans, and it's the most beautiful thing. Another quick example. I know a gal who got married in Italy. Very expensive wedding. They went all out. This girl can afford any flowers she wants. And what did she select? Baby's breath. Quite literally just baby's breath. Her bouquet, the floral arch, everything just dripping in baby's breath and nothing more. And it looked stunning. I mean, I wasn't invited, but I saw the pics and was floored. There are no bad flowers. It's all in how you use them. So what's the secret to dry gardening? You have to plant the right stuff. Right plant, right place. I'm sure you've heard that before. And you must water deeply and frequently during establishment, which is generally 4 to 8 weeks after planting in your yard. This is because the plant is going through a state of shock. You've just removed it from its grower's pot, which has totally different soil than your landscape, and the nursery was watering it daily. So it's important to give it a lot of water during the first couple months. But after this amount of time, assuming you're following right plant, right place, it should need no supplemental watering post-establishment. When it comes to right plant, right place, I love using grocery store orchids as an example here. It doesn't really matter what you do. That moth orchid arrangement on your kitchen counter is never going to do as well as it could growing outside on a tree. Enjoy the moth orchid arrangement inside for a few weeks. That's what you probably got it for, right? But when it starts to lose its petals, you use some twine and adhere it to that shady palm or oak in your yard. Give the orchid roots a quick spritz when you initially adhere it, and then let nature do the rest. So here's another part from Steve Solomon's book called Root System Vigor in the Cabbage Family. He writes, "Wild cabbage is a weed and grows like one, able to successfully compete for water against grasses and other herbs. Remove all competition with a hoe and allow this weed to totally control the moisture and nutrients in all the earth its roots can occupy, and it grows hugely and lushly. Just for fun, I once grew one with tillage, hoeing, and spring fertilization, but no irrigation. It ended up 5 feet tall and 6 feet in diameter." End quote. And I'm going to skip ahead to another part where he's talking about the cabbage family. He says, "As this highly moldable family is inbred and shaped into more and more exaggerated forms, it weakens and loses the ability to forage. Kale retains the most wild aggressiveness. Chinese cabbage perhaps the least." End quote. So where do we start with all of this? Everything's a business, and that includes education. So many folks want to sell you a gardening course or a book. I've met people that have done all the courses or have all the fancy credentials and the letters behind their name, but they have little practical hands-on experience and a lack of real-world understanding of the outdoor space. When seeking out plant advice, find the people who are sweating, literally. I personally want to talk to the farmer with dirt under his nails and a limited online presence, not the guy or gal sitting behind a screen all day. So here's my personal opinion. Don't start with online research. Stop reading and listening to the internet. And don't visit the local nursery, botanical garden, or the cute trendy garden show. All of these plants are receiving extra care and supplemental water. I want you to visit the worst yard on your block and pay attention to what's growing. I want you to pay attention to the roadside flowers that most folks consider weeds when you're out walking the dog or on a bike ride. I want you to explore the part of your local park where the soccer field butts up to the preserve, where there are tons of wild plantings that no one is actively managing. I want you to really get out there and go on a hike on public land, where there are no pretty paths to follow. Observe the flowers, shrubs, trees, and grasses. The art of observation, in real life, not on a screen, is one of the best tools in a gardener's toolbox. I could walk by a multi-million-dollar yacht and not even notice it. Seriously, I just have no interest. But that 2-inch quote-unquote weed growing in the parking lot at the marina, I want to know everything about it. That's how I discover many of Florida's wildflowers. Fleabane, for example, which we briefly touched on earlier. A lovely daisy-like flower that grows effortlessly in dry, sandy soil. Bring your phone, take a picture, and then look it up when you get home. preferably over a glass of wine or a summer shandy. Just my suggestion. Between the Florida Wildflower Foundation website and the University of Florida online resources, you'll be able to research and cross-reference all the plants you come across, and you'll know that the information you're getting is accurate, which is incredibly important. You'd be surprised how many plants you'll stumble across that are native that you never knew about. And of course, you're going to come across some Brazilian pepper and other exotic invasive vegetation like Lantana camara. You'll also learn about plants that are not native but are naturalized, or just play well with our natives, because natives are not the only plants that do well in a dry garden. You'll start to notice tiny, inconspicuous flowers in the turf. Imagine if we allowed our native frog fruit or pink purslane to spread out as a ground cover, instead of hindering its growth and instead forcing non-native, water-hungry turf to establish instead. It's wild to me that even in aggressive St. Augustine turf, these gorgeous native ground covers are trying to grow and spread. These are examples of great plants to take note of and try growing in your own space. It's just a great way to learn. When you see a Florida native strangler fig in the wild, quite literally strangling another plant to the point of killing it, you begin to understand how all these plants work together, or don't. Just like people, you'll see how some plants take more than they give without much thought to others. You'll start to understand how gray this subject matter really is. Muscadine grape is a Florida native vine, and it produces fruit that birds and other wildlife enjoy. Even humans can consume it. But when you see it out on public land, if you didn't know any better, you would think it's an extremely aggressive exotic on steroids. It takes over more than any other plant I have personally seen while out hiking. Folks talk about the invasive nature of tropical milkweed and Lantana camara, but I can tell you based on what I've seen out hiking Florida public lands, those aren't nearly as aggressive as some other plants. I'll come across a few tropical milkweed plants here and there, but I've never seen an entire field of it. The muscadine vine climbs up everything and then covers it completely. You can't even see the other plants that once stood there. It'll cover an entire tree line. The pines will look like they are wearing a cloak or a blanket of muscadine vine. Really starts to make you wonder. I think it's good to learn and form opinions based on reality. Go outside and see for yourself. And this brings us to a very important part of the episode. When you plant the right plants and do not provide them supplemental water after establishment, they are forced to develop a strong, deep root system. When plants are irrigated every day, the roots stay closer to the surface. This makes them dependent on you. It's totally the kid that never grew up. Same deal with our plants. When we are constantly feeding them synthetic fertilizers and running the irrigation, we are hindering them from becoming stronger and more resilient to periods of drought and extreme heat. This is also why you may have heard that trees that receive excess irrigation may be more likely to fall over during a storm. Their roots are shallow. They aren't anchored into the earth like a tree that has a deep, stable root system. So it's a tricky balance, because first and foremost, you have to plant the right thing. If you plant a hydrangea, I don't care what you do or don't do, it's going to struggle here. So it's very important you pick the right plants. But assuming you pick the right plants, it's really important to raise them the right way. Like a kid, take care of them when they are young, but eventually you gotta let them fall. I let my plants experience the stress of the outdoor environment because it's Florida. And just like we sweat when it's hot, some plants curl their leaves to conserve water. This curling reduces the surface area of the leaf exposed to the environment, aka it helps to minimize water evaporation from the leaves. Now, once again, it's critical to understand the difference between a plant dying and it just creating a defense mechanism because of the heat. But plenty of plants conserve moisture by curling leaves, and it doesn't mean the plant is dying. You may be wondering about soil. There's a lot of sand in Florida soil, although it's certainly not all sand. And yes, it depends on where you are. But for the sake of this conversation, let's just consider Florida to be sandy. I personally don't think you need to do a ton of amending. I prefer to put the plant directly into our Florida soil. There are different schools of thought on this though. Amendments can help give it a head start. I'm sure you've heard this. But the counter argument is that the compost or garden soil that you buy at the store will eventually start to wash away and your plants will have to get used to the sand anyway. I think it's more personal preference. Both can work. But something I do find interesting is Steve Solomon's thoughts on moisture retention in various types of soil. We tend to view sandy soil as a negative thing. Nutrients and water just rushing right through it. This excerpt is from Steve Solomon's 1992 book that I mentioned earlier. He writes, "Clay soil can provide plants with 3 times as much available water as sand, 6 times as much as a very coarse sandy soil. It might seem logical to conclude that a clayey soil would be the most drought resistant, but there's more to it. For some crops, deep sandy loams can provide just about as much usable moisture as clays. Sandy soils usually allow more extensive root development. So a plant with a naturally aggressive and deep root system may be able to occupy a much larger volume of sandy loam, ultimately coming up with more moisture than it could obtain from a heavy airless clay. And sandy loams often have a clayey, moisture-rich subsoil. Because of this interplay of factors, how much available water your own unique garden soil is actually capable of providing and how much you will have to supplement with irrigation can only be discovered by trial." End quote. Another thing I think is interesting is plant spacing. So a lot of stuff that I've read says if you're creating a dry garden or water-wise garden, you want to space out your plants, that way the roots do not compete for moisture in the soil. I understand and respect this school of thought. Here's another excerpt from our friend Steve. "Without irrigation, most of the plant's water supply is obtained by expansion into new earth that hasn't been desiccated by other competing roots. Eliminating any obstacles to rapid growth of root systems is the key to success." End quote. Makes sense, I get it. But I also can't help but think about how plants grow when I'm out on a hike, or when we envision a rainforest, whether tropical or temperate. Everything is usually dense. You've got the large canopy trees, the understory plants, and the forest floor. The trees provide shade for the understory plants. The forest floor is full of ground cover plants, mosses, ferns, acting as a living mulch. They help to conserve moisture in the earth and help to prevent runoff. And all of the plant litter feeds the soil. Everything works together. I've hiked through many Florida grasslands. Even there, the plants are not perfectly spaced out from one another, of course. Look, I'm not saying we can completely replicate this in our backyard, but I can't help but think leaning into this sort of naturalistic planting style might be beneficial with regards to drought-tolerant landscaping. Maybe I'm wrong, but it makes sense to me. I've crammed all sorts of plants together and had great success. I've also had a neat and tidy bed with podocarpus evenly spaced out. In both cases, the plants were receiving intense afternoon sun with no trees, no shade, and no irrigation. And in both cases, it worked. I didn't hand water post-establishment. So like most things in life, I'd say it probably depends. I've heard folks say, it doesn't matter what I plant, it dies in the summer heat. That just is not true. Once again, we are either not planting the right thing, not watering enough during establishment, and or you have a low tolerance for what a plant looks like with minimal human intervention. Plant something. A lot of this is trial and error. I guess as Nike would say, just do it. What you don't realize until you're in the landscape trade is there is always a loss. When a landscaper installs plants for a new project, they understand that up to 10% of the new plants may fail, even with irrigation. So that's part of it too, trial and error. But this isn't open heart surgery. Buy some seeds and see what happens. I've broken so many gardening rules. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I don't wait around for the right time or even the right season, frankly. When it doesn't work, it humbles you. When it does work, it challenges your perception of what's possible. It's inspiring and incredible, and you're just in awe of how it all happened. But either way, it's growth. You're learning. And yes, plants can become expensive. And that's why I strongly encourage you to start your small plantings, like your flowers and your vegetables, from seed. And buy everything else in a small pot. Opt for the 3-gallon container instead of the 7-gallon. I also encourage you to buy a variety of plants. especially if you're new to Florida gardening. I know from a design perspective, you may want to repeat plants to create a cohesive look, but for the sake of this conversation, I actually say don't do that. Instead of going all in on a couple types, buy one of many. That way, if something fails, you haven't put all your eggs in one basket. Plus, the diversity is fun. It makes for a more interesting garden. I actually lean towards this gardening style a lot lately. I've created a few private trellis gardens in my own personal space. Between both trellis gardens, aka pocket gardens, I have a variety of vines, including morning glory, bleeding heart, and Confederate jasmine, a plethora of shrubs, including American beautyberry, firebush, and sweet almond, ground cover such as perennial peanut, frog fruit, and baby sunrose, and flowers such as tropical sage, fleabane, lantana, blanket flower, and even some annuals like Mexican sunflower for a fun pop of color. Mind you, one of these pocket gardens is on the west side of my house, and the other is on the north side. Some of these plants I just listed are in both gardens, while others are a better fit for only one because of the sun exposure. So yes, without a fraction of a doubt, you can create a dry garden in all sun exposures. And although I'm not currently growing any grasses, they too make an excellent addition to a dry garden. They come in a variety of sizes, so you can incorporate many types to create an interesting landscape. Muley grass, white fountain grass, purple fountain grass, cordgrass, Fakahatchee standard, and Fakahatchee dwarf are all wonderful. Other plants that I grow in more traditional, neat, and tidy landscape beds include podocarpus, gold mound, plumbago, and mondo grass. These beds are visible to my community, so I have to be a little bit more respectful, I suppose, of what they see. But rest assured, these beds are not irrigated either, and the plumbago is still blooming, and the podocarpus is still green and happy. Another example that comes to mind is I worked with a town center to redesign a part of the complex that had been neglected. This is a low-light area. It receives some dappled morning sun, but no intense direct light later in the day. We drained the water out of a large decommissioned stone fountain and filled it with a mix of macho ferns, sword ferns, and foxtail ferns. Surrounding the fountain were landscape beds, which I filled with more ferns, monsteras, and a few vines. There were a couple mature foxtail palms already in the bed. I added the bleeding heart vines for vertical interest, training them to twine around the trunks of these palms. I really went for it with these. Spacing was out the window. I mixed lots of different ferns together, paying no mind to spacing, trying to replicate a more naturalistic design style. I wanted everything to look a bit wild. We were aiming for a controlled chaos. Now there is a concrete wall, and on the wall I added some wall-mounted planters containing bromeliads, pothos, and more ferns. The wall-mounted planters absolutely had to be hand-watered. There's nowhere for the roots to go. They are dependent on supplemental watering when there's no rain. But all of the in-ground landscaping, zero. In fact, I told their property management to turn the irrigation off. Bold move on my end, considering I'm responsible if things don't go as planned, but it worked. It's been over 2 years since the installation, and the in-ground plants are still doing great, with no supplemental water outside of that establishment period. They are totally thriving, green, and lush, just what off nature provides alone. Look, I didn't go to school for bugs or plants. I don't have the academic knowledge, but I do have some hands-on experience, practical learning, and not to mention with my own neck out on the line. It's my business, and when a plant fails, I'm responsible for replacing it. So I have every reason to want that landscape or potted arrangement to succeed. The less money I spend on plant replacements means more money in my pocket. I believe I have maintained enough plants and observed enough, whether a roadside wildflower or hiking out on public land, to notice patterns, identify problems, and generally get an idea of what does well in a multitude of environments with little to no attention. I've also started hundreds of seeds, created what I refer to as my own trial gardens in my own space with zero irrigation, and documented my findings. At this point, I think I can safely say we have been gaslit. I also want to be very clear that this episode doesn't apply to potted plants. I'm talking about in-ground landscaping, although there are many plants that will get by without assistance in a pot. Succulents, of course, but many others too. Their roots will grow out of the drainage holes in the pot and seek out moisture in the earth. essentially behaving like an in-ground landscape plant. Sometimes folks think pots are less maintenance, but they're really not. Yes, a few statement pots at the front door or around your pool, I'm all for that. But if your entire bed is just lined with like little 8-inch pots, you're in trouble, especially if they're clay. Seriously, clay pots should not be used outside in the Florida sun unless it's a succulent or you're planting something with a deep or large root system that will grow out of the drainage hole. Clay is very porous. You're losing water so quickly in a full sun bed. From a watering perspective, almost anything in ground is going to be easier to maintain than in a pot. This is because the roots are not limited to the container. They can spread out and seek moisture deeper in the earth. Now, another piece from Steve's book, at the end, he has some photos of his garden, and one of them is a picture of like a row of carrots growing in his garden bed. Underneath the photo is the following text. These carrots are thinned 1 foot apart in the row. The between row spacing is 5 feet. The carrots got no water whatsoever all summer. The photo was taken in mid-July. By season's end, they grew to an average diameter of 5 inches and weighed in at over 1 pound each. End quote. If you're new to all this, I strongly encourage that you read up on Florida natives and Florida-friendly plants. Once again, stick to credible sources such as the University of Florida and the Florida Wildflower Foundation. There is a show put on by the Florida Friendly Landscape Program called Flip My Florida Yard. They go around and fix up real people's yards in Florida with an emphasis on planting the right stuff and being mindful of water use, wildlife, etc. You can access their episodes for free on YouTube if you're interested. Once again, the show is called Flip, F-L-I-P, My Florida Yard. I've watched a couple episodes and it's quite entertaining and educational. Now, there are also tons of tropicals you can grow down here, especially if you're in South Florida and parts of Central Florida. Think Caribbean and think houseplants. Disclaimer, when it comes to these plants, some of them do a bit too well outside. For example, put pothos in the right place and it'll grow up your trees and even attach to the surface of your home. Sansevieria, aka the snake plant, is another that grows very well outside. They spread via rhizomes, aka underground stems, causing them to get out of hand if you're a more passive gardener. Just be mindful. I also think it's really important to understand what a true Florida native is. Oftentimes, they are difficult to find in the store. For example, you may see tick seed, aka Coreopsis, at Home Depot, but it's likely not the Florida native Coreopsis. So it's not going to last as long, it won't be as drought tolerant, and its seeds are probably sterile, so you won't get the benefit of it reseeding. You'll have to keep buying more and more. Same deal with edible gardens. If you buy a tomato at a big box store, it'll probably just last one season, and it'll need tons of attention during that time. Alternatively, you can grow the Everglades tomato, which freely grows out in the wild here in our state. It's technically not native, but certainly naturalized. Anyway, you plant that once and you're set for life. You will have tomatoes year-round with minimal effort. That's why I recommend seed starting when possible. It's a lot easier to find exactly what you're looking for. Florida Wildflower Co-op is great for this. And of course, if you have a local native nursery, go that route. Incredible Edible Landscapes in Loxahatchee, Florida is great. They sell all sorts of Florida native and Florida-friendly veg and fruit, potted and ready to go. You don't have to worry about seed starting. And even if you don't plan on visiting or you're nowhere near Loxahatchee, check out their website anyway, because they list all of their plants on it. So it's a great way to familiarize yourself with many Florida plants, especially if you're south of Vero. If you don't have a local native nursery and you don't want to start plants from seed, check out the National Wildlife Federation. They sell native potted plants on their website, so you can buy them online and they'll deliver them to you. Their website is gardenforwildlife.com. Check that out for more info. You might be surprised to learn that a lot of nurseries and garden centers that don't advertise natives actually carry quite a few. For example, my favorite nursery in Palm City is Ed Miller & Son. They are an old-school wholesale and retail nursery. They don't promote wildlife and pollinator plants, but they sure do have them. You just got to take the time to look around their nursery. They have American Beautyberry, wild coffee, sea grape, dune sunflower, and railroad vine, just to name a few. For more info on edibles, check out David the Good, a YouTuber that grows edibles in the northern part of our state. He's a great resource for anyone in north central Florida and further up. Stacks Urban Harvest is a YouTuber that grows edibles in the southern part of our state. So if you're in South Florida, he's the guy. Now, what about my lawn? Tear it out is my knee-jerk reaction, if I'm being honest. Look, we need athletic fields. Got it. So I'm not going to argue that. But I will speak to the average backyard use with dogs and kids. Mulch it. You don't need all that sod. Your children and pets will be fine, I promise. What if you teach them self-sufficiency through gardening? I believe we must reframe the mind. Instead of a one-dimensional yard covered in turf, you can create a multi-sensory botanical garden in the backyard for your children. How wonderful is that? I think it's more engaging for a child to watch a caterpillar undergo metamorphosis or teach them how to grow their own food. I don't get this whole where will the kids play? Let them play with bugs. Let them pick flowers. View the backyard as an extension of your indoor space. It's another room. You paid for the square footage when you bought your home, so why waste it? When I was a kid, I didn't have a yard. We lived in a rented duplex. And I'll tell you, kids are resourceful. I'd find all sorts of areas to play. I was outside all the time, digging for worms, riding my bike with the neighborhood kids, and doing some real Florida things like catching lizards and clipping them to my ears. I don't look back and think, man, if I would have grown up with a yard of manicured turf. Yeah, now you guys know. I have a ton of childhood trauma because I didn't have my own patch of St. Augustine grass to sit in. I'm a victim. So yeah, anyway, we utilized a lot of public parks growing up. I mean, we're already paying for them through taxes anyway. Look, I'm not trying to sound extreme, and I know the world is a different place today, but I think you understand what I'm getting at here. Now, an interesting way that you can kill Florida native or Florida-friendly plants that, frankly, I just hadn't put a lot of thought into before starting roots and seeing it firsthand is by running daily irrigation, which is fine. I'm not saying you can't do that. That's not the problem. But what happens is then one day the irrigation breaks. Or maybe you're listening to this and now you want to go outside and cut yours off too. That's like an addict quitting something cold turkey. You can't do that. Because although these natives and Florida-friendly plants always had the potential to grow strong, deep roots and learn to survive a period of drought, they never had to. You either need to keep the irrigation going at the same frequency, or you need to slowly wean them off. All the roots are on the surface. They have no idea what to do. I know nothing about sports, so I don't know why I'm about to give you this example, but it's like you can have an all-star NBA player, but if they've been sitting out for the season due to a leg injury, yeah, I mean, they're still a great athlete, but they need physical rehab. I have a fantastic real-life example of this. I was maintaining some Green Island ficus, which is an excellent, low-maintenance, drought-tolerant green shrub. They were receiving irrigation every single evening. But then, for some reason, the property management cut the irrigation, and I had no idea. And the plants totally freaked. All the leaves were brown and crispy within a few weeks' time. These specific plants never would have reacted that way if they had not been receiving daily supplemental water. It was just a bit excessive. Funny enough, around the same time, I was maintaining another bed with the same plant, Green Island ficus, in intense afternoon sun exposure. The only difference is this bed was not irrigated, and the Green Island ficus was doing more than fine. Now, funny enough, the client actually wanted all of the Green Island ficus pulled out, and I gotta tell you, that Green Island ficus was such a nightmare to pull out because its roots had fully entrenched themselves in the bed due to a lack of daily watering. Now, once again, this does not work for all plants. You put something with naturally shallow roots that can't handle our Florida heat in your landscape, try to establish it, and then wean it off from being watered, it's not going to do well. I should mention that mulch is your best friend in any garden, but especially a dry garden. This will help tremendously with moisture retention. If possible, opt for something natural. Dyed mulches are not ideal, but if you like a dyed mulch and you have a lot of sun, go with something lighter. Black mulch is going to absorb more heat than a lighter color. I like mixing mulches. I'll mix pine straw and a hardwood together, for example, or mini pine bark nuggets with fallen oak leaves I've collected. There isn't one type of mulch, aka leaf litter, out in nature. You'll find a variety, so I like to lean into that. Before this episode comes to a close, I want to stress that dry gardening, whether for food or ornamentals, plants that are not receiving supplemental water will take longer to grow. If you're in a rush, buy larger containers, a 7-gallon opposed to a 3-gallon. This episode by no means should encourage you to add aggressive invasive plants to the landscape. Filling the landscape with Brazilian pepper won't get you invited to the next neighborhood block party. And last but not least, don't be scared. This isn't open heart surgery. We are planting seeds and making observations. Our ancestors were doing this long before the internet. They didn't take a course. They just did it. All right, that wraps up episode 23 of The Florida Gardener. We'll see you soon for episode 24. And in the meantime, if you'd like to subscribe to my free newsletter, download one of my Etsy garden templates, or check out my social, you can access everything through my website, rootsredefined.com. That's roots, R-O-O-T-S, redefined, REDEFINED.com. All right, thanks guys. We'll see you again soon.